So this evening is called Unveiling Spiritual Psychology. So I think we better start with some definitions. And the word psyche is the Greek word for the soul. And so from that angle, the word psychology is, knowing about the soul. Except that in the scientific world that the environment that we are in, um, people are not looking at the soul mostly, they're looking at the brain. And so we have a neuroscientist with us, is that right? So he will be looking at nerves and things like that, brain and brain stem and sensory input, behaviors and all of these things, you see. And then, my speciality is not really that, but more I have studied and practiced about meditation and spirituality as is known in especially the culture and philosophy of India. There it talks about the soul as consciousness. And the soul uses the brain, but the soul is not part of the brain. So it really looking at the being as something quite different from the human body. And so therefore we are looking at psychology as knowing about the psyche, knowing about the soul, and how we, thinking of ourselves as souls, are impacted by circumstances. And what circumstances do to the individual being. And so the individual being, the soul, is considered as a non-physical force of life, which is highly sensitive and which experiences a big spectrum of feelings and sensitivities via the brain. When somebody dies, we would say that the soul separates from the body and what's left is something called the remains. So the body, when the soul is not there, that's called the remains. And what do you do with the remains? Burn, bury, something like that. And in that context, we would say that the actual being, the actual person, is not what remains, but is what animates the body. And this is what goes. And then the person is pronounced dead because there are no further vital signs. So as far as I can tell, the scientific community has been very good at detecting signs of life, but not life itself. And this is a question, a deep question, that what is exactly life? Then in that context, what is exactly death? So normally, when you think of a person as a living human being, then you have someone with a personality who's talking, who's doing stuff, who's behaving in a certain way. And by observing that person, you make assessments and draw conclusions about what kind of person this is. You like them, you don't like them, you want to get close, you don't, you want to develop a relationship, you don't, all of these things. And so the way we look at it in spirituality is that everyone is a spiritual being who is a someone operating through a body which is a something. So looking at the body as an object, you get a body at a certain point in time. and then you leave that body at another point in time. And so on your tombstone, you will have your date of arrival and your date of departure. Where did you come from and where do you go? This is unknown. However, in spirituality, we investigate this a little bit because we want to understand, who am I? What am I? Where have I come from is important. And where am I going? Also important. And then there are some things that religion tells us about the soul. For example, it is said that the soul is immortal, right? They say. So immortal means you do not die. You cannot die. And of course, you can see lots of people dying. And so you think these people have some funny ideas about how you do not die while dying. And so what you believe, what you see. And so what you see is the remains. And then you say this person died. But the remains are when the person has gone. So death applies to the body, but not really to the soul. The soul goes. It doesn't cease to exist. But you cannot track the soul because the soul is not made of matter. And your instruments of perception enable you to see material things or hear or touch or detect material things. And therefore, in spirituality, we also hear about the third eye. So the third eye is said to be in the center of the forehead. And you have never seen any other eye opening and closing in anybody's forehead, except they're on pictures. You see sometimes pictures of people with the third eye. And we don't have any pictures of people with the third eye here, but we could. Maybe we should. And usually you'll see the two eyes go horizontally and the third eye goes vertically. The third eye is not a physical eye. The third eye is something more like the eye of wisdom. So it's to do with perception, which doesn't see physical things, but which sees non-physical things. Sometimes you may be having somebody talking to you and they're explaining something that you don't know about, and then gradually you say, yeah, I see, I see, I see. What you mean by that is I understand. So in that sense, the third eye is to do with understanding and understanding concepts. Many concepts are not the same as physical objects, they're ideas. And so the soul is actually real, but cannot be perceived by the sense organs, but it can be understood. And so your third eye is another word for saying it is your capacity to understand something which is non-material, but which is not outside your range of being able to understand if you have enough information. And so in that sense, if we are talking about spiritual psychology, it's in a way using the word spiritual and psyche both to mean the same thing, which is really, it's about knowing about the soul, what happens to the soul over time. Because, okay, you say soul is immortal, that means that there is no point in time when the soul begins or ends. So this is difficult to conceptualize because we're used to things having a beginning and an ending. And so what do we think about things which go on for a very long time, like the sun, for example, that goes on for a long time. And so then religious people will say, well, God said, let there be light, and the sun turned on. So that was the start of the sun. Switch on. And when you switch on, then presumably there is a switch off, which makes the sun limited by a few gazillion years, but nevertheless with a starting point and an ending point. And then we had Einstein, who said, well, matter cannot be created or destroyed. So then we say, how are we going to deal with that? And it is said that matter is made from, you can say, the stable elements of air, earth, fire, water, and ether. These are stable elements. All the other elements are relatively unstable, but these are stable. And so it is said, especially in ancient times, that air, earth, fire, water, and ether are matter. They cannot be created or destroyed. That means the sun doesn't have any beginning point. Presumably, maybe not, but maybe. And then, of course, water. Water doesn't have any beginning or an end. That's quite good. We need water. And then earth. Earth is made of lots of different types of things, but earth. Then we have air. It'd be good quality, bad quality, but basically there is air. And then ether is basically space. And so this is a way of looking at things, which ancient people looked at things like that. Modern people don't. I think the scientific education makes us look at bits and pieces. You look at the human body, and then some people look at the nervous system, some people look at the blood system, the lymph system, the different organs, and they become specialized in those. So it tends not to be holistic. And so you focus on pieces. And pieces are very easy to describe as having a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so when you're looking at spiritual psychology, one thing you could say is you're looking at the person as they present themselves at the present time, the current life, or the present moment in the current life. You're in a context and you are operating in a context, but there's many things that you do not know about past or future. And there may even be influences operating in the present that you didn't take into consideration, or you couldn't detect, or you didn't think about when you're thinking about a person. And there's another idea which is kind of interesting to me, at least, is that a human being is formed physically with the same kind of ratio as the planet. Like the human body is more or less 70% water, and the planet has more or less 70% water on it. And so the other percentages follow suit. And none of those really tell us much about consciousness. In spirituality, what we learn is that you have to have two things, matter and spirit, in order for things to happen meaningfully. Sometimes in philosophy, they say if a tree fell down in a remote jungle and nobody saw it, did it happen? It's a question you learn in philosophy, you know. So why this question comes has to do with perception. So if somebody perceives something, then you know it happened because you can record it, you have a memory of it, you take a photograph of it, so you say this happened, here's the evidence. See, or if there's a crime, somebody says this thing happened, you have to produce evidence in order for there to be acceptance that this happened. Otherwise, it's just a claim, you see. And so there is a lot in the way that we think, intuitively, naturally, and how we speak about these that points us towards some of these ancient ideas, because we use them without realizing that how we're talking about things actually doesn't correspond to the scientific way of how the world is, but we don't have a problem with operating in different systems all at the same time. For example, you know, we live in a democracy, right? More or less. I mean, it's called a democracy. And the idea of a democracy is everybody is born free, everybody has rights, responsibilities, etc., etc. But the sort of natural human family is hardly democratic, and because it's pyramidal in structure. That seems to operate very powerfully in human society. It's very, very rare that you have a human society that's automatically democratic. You don't make it democratic. And it doesn't stay democratic very long. It's a nice idea. So you don't have the Republic of Heaven, for example. It's called a kingdom. For those who believe in the kingdom of heaven. But the kingdom, we have animal kingdom, and then we have human democracy. And humans are kind of animals who are not very democratic. So we have a lot of ideas which do not correspond with how things run. So this means that we sometimes try to force our ideas upon the way things are, and they don't necessarily fit very well. And if you go to more ancient ideas about what a person is, you generally find a lot of talk about the spirit and the body, or you hear about mind, body, spirit. But in the spirituality that I work with, the mind is one of the instruments of the soul. You've all got a mind, right? I presume, yeah? Got a mind. But you've never seen it. And don't think in neuroscience you've been able to actually identify the mind. No. You see, you can see what the brain, how the brain responds to different stimuli. And there are different areas of the brain that deal with talking and walking and whatever we do, which requires brain. But feeling is a little bit difficult to detect. Somebody feels comfortable with this person, but not with that person. What's that? It's quite subtle, you know. Or somebody likes this color more than that color. It's very individual, it's very subjective. And I think in the scientific world, we tend to think that if it's objective, it's, you know, verifiable, it's real, you can believe it. If it's subjective, it's probably not really believable. And so we tend to discount the subjective. But in spirituality, we look at it a very different way, that the subjective is very real, very important, very valid. I, the soul, perceive through my body, which includes my brain and my eyes, ears, etc., etc. But there are some things that you perceive that are not physical, like atmosphere. There is tension in the atmosphere, right? Sometimes tension in the atmosphere because of how people are feeling. You feel it, but you don't feel it with your skin or your nose or any of your sense organs. And so in spirituality, we would say you feel it with your mind. So we would say that the mind is an instrument of perception. It can do a number of things, but perception, and it can perceive material things, but it can also perceive non-material things. It can perceive physical things, it can perceive subtle things. And then also it can perceive things that are not there, like imagination, you know. And for example, if you go, you know, in a dark or almost dark and you're in the forest and you can see monsters, right? There aren't any monsters. There might be some wild animals, but you don't see them. You see how the tree looks like a monster. Or you might look at the sky and you see clouds which look like different creatures or even people. And so your mind plays with these things. And This is called creativity. We tend to operate in the mind by association. You think all the time, really. Some people quantify how many thoughts people think, and they come in the tens of thousands. It's quite an interesting thing to observe yourself, sit down and observe yourself, and try to really put your finger on, okay, what thoughts are arising in my mind moment by moment. And you'd be surprised what comes in your mind, especially when you want to meditate. Say, okay, I'll meditate now for about 10 minutes. Okay, that's not too long. So you say, okay, well, I don't know how to meditate, but I'm going to meditate for 10 minutes. And if you, especially whether you know or you don't know, it doesn't make that much difference. So you think about, what the other people are doing, or you think about something that happened during the day which irritated you, bothered you, or was curious or memorable or pleasant or unpleasant, because there are impressions that come on your mind through the day, and some strong, some light. And when you sit down doing nothing in particular, they arise in your mind and float around. And they sort of pass the time or distract you or something. And some people, they equate meditation with concentration, which is good. It's a good description of meditation, concentration, but concentrate on what, you see? And so meditation, it would be said, okay, you concentrate on your soul. Well, how do you do that? And so you need more information. So what is said is, okay, you concentrate on yourself as a being of light. So consider yourself to be a being of light, non-material. You are the spark of life. That's an idea, right? People talk about a spark of life. So you are the animating force in your body. So you make your body move, you animate this, which otherwise is an object. So in many ways, the energy of the soul is similar to electricity. And if you are in a biology class in school and you have a dead frog, you can make it move by putting some electricity into it, right? And it'll jump. So there's, this energy of the soul has to make the body move. So it is comparable to electricity without being the kind of electricity that you plug your lights into. But it's an energy, and it's aware of its existence. Otherwise, electricity is not aware that I'm lighting up the light, and maybe I'll just turn off by myself. Sometimes it seems to have a mind of its own, but it's not supposed to. And yet the soul does have a mind of its own. You can decide, you can say no, or you can say go away, or you can say I'm here. Or you can say I want you to love me. Souls deal in love, hate, sometimes people say, all I want is a bit of peace and quiet, right? Have you experienced that? When there's too much sensory overload and too much going on, you say, I just want some peace and quiet. So there is something about the soul which prefers certain energies which are harmonious, which are positive, and which, seem to energize you. So this interface between spirit and matter is all the time, all the time, all the time. But because you can't really detect it with your physical sense organs, and people don't talk about it much in detail, you have to just rely on your intuition and go along with it. But it is very intriguing. And there are people, especially teenagers, I think, who challenge all the information that they are told by these wise and wonderful adults to see whether they can check it out for themselves, you see. And they want to know, who am I? What is this? Are these people telling me the truth? It doesn't make much sense what they tell me. Okay, I have to go along with it, but I don't really, maybe I will rebel. Maybe I'll pretend to cooperate, but really I, don't agree. All of this goes on a lot in the minds of a person who's in between childhood and adulthood. I think once you get to adulthood, you kind of get stuck and stay there and just get old, right? But that's not very interesting. It's good to, try to keep on, learning things and figure things out and get new experiences and go to different places, different cultures, and so on. So young people are quite interested in traveling around, right? And traveling around means that you spend time with people different, think differently, believe differently, operate differently, eat differently, dress differently, have different types of values, and so on. And so you have a different context in which to figure out what you think. And then you read, you watch movies, you do all sorts of things to widen, broaden your experience. And the other thing is you get traumatized by something along the way, right? A lot of people get childhood trauma, right? Brutality, you may be in a war, you may get accident, you may get ill, your parents may die or get sick or go nuts, or all sorts of things happen which are very traumatic. And this creates a distortion in the soul. That's where you have psychologists coming along, see if they can fix it. Or they may give you some chemicals, some psychotropic drugs, because the medical profession looks at these things as something that affects your brain chemistry. So you can maybe do something about it by adding or subtracting some chemicals and making everything okay. Because there is an effect. And one little experiment you can think of quite easily is you may have tears when you feel really very terrible grief and sorrow. And these will be salty tears. Then you may laugh and really enjoy something and cry, and these will be sweet tears. They're chemical. The salty type or the sweet type. And they both come from your lacrimal glands. But certain things make you cry sweet, and certain things make you cry salty. Right? And why is this? Well, we can say that what happens to you mentally, spiritually, in your feelings, in your heart, and so on, has an effect on your body, how it functions, Or sometimes you may be doing nothing at all and you're just hungry. And sometimes you may be very, very busy and go for 2 or 3 days without eating because you're too busy to get hungry. Have you seen that? You see, so it's not that your body suddenly doesn't need food when you're busy, but food is not just only something that you take in when you're hungry. food is something that you take in when you need something. So sometimes we have certain food called comfort food. And then there are certain things that people ingest to make themselves feel differently. I see. So, you might say, oh, I need a drink, alcohol. And why do you need a drink? Anxiety, right? Usually stress, you see. So these substances, these are mind-altering substances that people take in order to allay different forms of anxiety. I remember being an old person, I remember people who lived through the Second World War, and they smoked a lot of cigarettes because it's very stressful to have bombs exploding on your head all day long and all night long for 6 years. And so they would smoke because it depresses your nervous system and makes you a little bit less anxious. This is called self-medication, but it's also very, very highly addictive. You see. And so when people have psychological problems, quite often you will find that there is some kind of an addiction. Addiction can be a substance or it can be a behavior, you see. And then you have kids who are called, what is it, ADHD, something like that. You know, why would a kid get ADHD? Because of trauma. What kind of trauma? Life is traumatic, because what you like as a child, I think, is a little bit of, it has to be normal, it has to be peaceful, it has to be loving, it has to be regular, it has to be structured, it has to be predictable. Everybody has to be nice to each other genuinely. If they fake it, you'll know, you see. And then they all tell you, you don't know what you're talking about, but you do. But you have to pretend that you don't. It's traumatic, right? And then you have noise pollution. You have television going on all the time, 58 different channels all at once, And then this crash and that crash and airplanes going, cars going, the motorbikes going, this, that, all this is sensory overload. And it's very difficult for a person to navigate those things, especially when they're very young, because you don't have any tools for dealing with life as permanent state of, chaos. So you get this, and then you get chemicals to sort it out. And then you get graded as an ungradable, And then it's reflected back to you that you're not okay. So you probably think, yeah, maybe I'm not okay. And all of this creates psychological problems. And it's also spiritual wounds, you see. So in my thinking, I think most everybody is wounded spiritually to a greater or lesser extent, in the heart, in the mind, in the soul, in your being, in your how you are reflected, because when people see you, they don't see you. They see some sort of projection they project on you, and they see that. And then they assess you according to their projected image on you. And so you experience yourself to be invisible. Nobody can see you. I'm here, hello. No, you're ignored. You don't exist. Or if you don't fulfill certain boxes that have to be checked, then you're X'd out. You're not valid. You don't count. And this is also traumatic. You see, because it's very difficult for a person growing up like that to be independent of these inputs. And if we talk about spiritual psychology in that context, we're talking about introducing a whole set of concepts into your mind. For the purpose of giving you tools, as Brother Harsha was saying, tools. You need tools to deal with this chaos, right? If the house is on fire, you need at least a fire extinguisher as a tool, you know. And if it's too noisy, you need some earplugs as tools. And so there are also much more subtle tools. So I think one very important tool has to do with your self-identity. You see, because you need to be able to decide for yourself who you are. And so how do you decide who you are? Because you've been having all these messages about who you are, none of which is even remotely true. And so you choose between a number of different false pieces of information. See if you can find the least offensive, but it's still untrue. And so spirituality will say, well, the truth about you is you are a being of light and you're invisible. So obviously nobody can see you because you're invisible. So, but it's okay to be invisible because everybody's invisible. And so now you are an invisible being. You are made of love. Have you ever seen love? It's invisible, right? There's no thing which is called love. And you're also made of purity. There's nothing like that, right? And you're also made of power. What kind of power? Power, raw power, pure power, love power, power love. And you're also made of peace, serenity, comfort. You're made of joy. I see. So all of these things, you could say, okay, these are kind of emotions. You can feel love and feel, but you don't know what purity feels like. It's too subtle, right? Way too subtle. And love, you can say, I need to feel wanted, I need to feel affection, and you have all of these things that make you feel good, and you say, yeah, that's love. But it's, a gesture that indicates love, but it's not love itself, And the soul is very hungry for these feelings. And they're not really feelings, they're more like energies, you see. So this soul gets very depleted. The animating force, the power that is the soul gets depleted as a consequence of living life, because it's an energy, and the energy of the soul is getting used in action through the body and getting tired. For example, at the end of a work day, you're tired, right? And you say, I'm going to have a shower and go to sleep and restore myself. So this sleep will restore you physically and also spiritually. So, for example, people who are sleep deprived, they get psychological problems because they're not able to restore themselves spiritually as well as physically. So one good way to torture somebody is not let them go to sleep, and they do that. There's no blood, but it's no good, And so the soul has to know how to take care of the self spiritually and physically, because the soul and body are always together. And this embodied soul is the expressed human being, you see, and that is what we are, an embodied soul expressing what we are, who we are, and there's interaction with each other. And this interaction can be very nurturing or it can be very damaging. It's up to the individual. You want to interact with somebody in a nurturing way or a damaging way. That's choice. And why would you interact with somebody in a nurturing way is because you're fundamentally loving. And you probably experience this. There's a lot of people around who look at you and think, oh, this one can love me very nicely, right? So they start sucking on your energy and become energy vampires. Have you come across that? I think you have to protect yourself because, I am not your lunch, excuse me. But this is an indication that people are really spiritually depleted and they go around looking out for somebody they can, take energy from. Spiritual energy, but it's actually not a very good idea to be a cannibal. It's not considered okay, right? But that's what's going on, you see. And so it's very important in terms of nurturing the soul to find a source which is not another human being. You see, so sometimes people have a cat. I will do that with your cat or your dog or your horse. And then the animals are pretty good. They're very giving of energy. But even then, you can freak out your cat by trying to take too much energy. A relationship is a give and take of something mutually beneficial. And you do get a certain amount of energy, but not quite enough. And especially if you have a lot of trauma, which has created distortions in the soul and which is also bleeding the soul. And so you're losing a lot of energy very quickly. And the other thing that happens is you get a lot of negative feelings like anxiety, panic, other types of emotions which are a bit uncontrollable and which cause you to do things which are counterproductive, damaging to yourself and to other people. And there you bring in another element, which is called karma. You've heard this word karma before. The karma is a very interesting concept because it helps us to understand how certain behaviors give you energy and other behaviors drain you of energy. So if you do something which gives you energy, this would be called as a pure karma or a good karma. And if you have the other kind, which drains you of energy, that's a negative karma. And karma also comes in the word that is used is bondage, but there's other words also. Because these things are very subtle, we have to use metaphors to describe them. And in religion they talk about sin, right? You see, nobody knows what sin is. But in terms of karma philosophy, what is said is quite interesting, is that when you do something negative, which drains your energy, which is harmful to somebody else or something else, it creates a force which puts you off track and makes you not who you really are. And sometimes you use the expression when somebody's behaving in a weird way, you say, well, this person is not himself today or not herself today. So it's like a force that makes you not be who you are. And if you have too much of that, you kind of lose your sense of identity altogether. And you also get a lot of negative feedback. So you acquire a sense of identity which is just totally far away from what you really are. And then you become very much under the influence of circumstances, very difficult to separate yourself from the force of circumstances. And then you blame them for your situation. This is very normal. And so in spiritual psychology, you could say that you need to, first of all, have access to a source, a really powerful source, external source, which gives you grounding and which gives you that positive energy. And also you need to have a kind of education in how to handle circumstances in a way that keeps you in contact with your essential self. And so whatever you can do in those areas, I would call it spiritual psychology.